Hello, everyone. The internet is being weird, so I hope this video works. We are getting ready to get into Genesis this semester, which, you know, I've actually never gone through, not, I mean, I have in my own, but never like in campus ministry done a Bible study on Genesis, which is crazy. So I'm excited for it because I mean, this may sound obvious, but it's foundational to a lot of things. In week one, we're just doing Genesis 1, which is plenty. So let me walk you through it a little bit, kind of show you where we're headed. Basically, I've broken down the chapter into three sections. The first section is big. It's just the first 24 verses, which basically gets us all the way through. What is that? It's either in the middle of day 6 or end of day 5. Yeah. So it gets you all the way through up to kind of making people. So make people have its own section. So really what I want to point out is that Genesis, I think the problem that we have a lot of times with Genesis 1 is that we try to make it answer questions it's not trying to answer. I don't think, I'm not, one of those people that's like, you either have faith or you have science. I don't think that's true. I think that God created all things and that we're not going to like disprove God by being scientific, right? Or asking those kinds of questions. I think that's not correct. But what I do think is that it's a mistake to treat Genesis, especially Genesis 1, like a science textbook. I don't really think it strives to answer the questions of age of Earth or about, all the other theories of creation from the scientific realm, dinosaurs, whatever other questions. Like even we can talk about this if you want later, but like the literal 7 days of creation, I think there's a lot of different ways to talk about that. What the chapter is about is it's about God. You have to think about when it was written. They're coming out of Egypt, where they're basically functioning polytheists. You can see that in the golden calf episode and Exodus. And God is revealing himself to them. Who is he and how do people relate to him just on a basic fundamental level? And furthermore, who are we in light of that created reality? Who did he create us to be? And so what you'll see in the chapter is that God creates, I think the way I like the commentary puts it, it's functions and functionaries. In other words, God created places and things to function within those places. So you have the sky and the birds, you have the land and the animals, you have the oceans and you have the sea creatures, things like that. And the point is that everything in creation has its place and has its role, its function, its design. And so, and I'll talk about that more before you guys get into Bible study, but what I want you talking about is basically, I want you to maybe kind of open the door. How have you guys heard about Genesis? One, how have you heard it talked about? You know, what are some of the presuppositions we have coming to the table? And then why do you think it's important that Moses, the author, is showing that God is making order out of chaos? Because that's a big theme of Genesis 1. And this is really important because what it means is that, we live in a world of chaos, right? We live in a world where it kind of feels like what will go wrong, where what could go wrong will go wrong. There's a lot of death and struggle and all kinds of things. And it's important right off the bat, and this would have been important for the ancient Israelites as well, that God is not a God of chaos. He's a God of order. That is his desire, and that is his design. And where that is going to take us, if we follow that thread throughout the Bible, is that God, through Jesus, is trying to restore what has been broken in the chaos that we feel around us and within us. And so Genesis is setting the page to be like, God is not a God of chaos. He's a God of order, and he wants that for you. And he wants that for your friends and your family. And he's inviting us into that in Jesus. So that's why it's important. Some other questions to consider here. How do we see God in creation? I have a Romans 1 here about what's known about God can be seen through his created order. And this could be a good conversation point for your group. Um, how do you see God's design and his goodness in creation? What way is that broken? How have you experienced God through the created world? What kind of things can you learn about God by observing creation? So these are some talking points that you can lead people through. So that's the first section. I'm passing over some things there, but that's the big idea that God's taking order out of chaos. He's making places and people and creatures to function in their way in those places, and God wants to restore that in us. The next section I have is verses. I think my verses are messed up on my sheet here, so go with what the sheet says if I'm wrong in this video here, but I think it's verse 25 to 31, where God makes people and he calls them images. What's important to know about this is that an image bearer, image and idol, similar if not the same words, an image was meant to kind of carry the essence of the God. So if someone is making a little idol to be an image of, let's say, like Baal, one of the Old Testament gods, they weren't trying to be like, this is how I think my God, Baal, looks. That wasn't really the issue. They were trying to make something that would kind of carry the essence and maybe the power of God with it. When he calls us images, what that means is that he made us in a specific and certain way, like with a creation, with a created intent in mind. And just like the rest of creation, that means we have design and meaning and dignity as people. But it means more than that, because being his image bearers means that we are his representatives. We carry God's essence with us. Even people who don't know God, in a way, carry that mark with them. This shows up later in Genesis. But what this means for Bible study is, a lot of people have a lot of ideas of what it means to be an image bearer. And so please feel free to let people kind of share their thoughts and things like that. But what we'll see, what I hope to share and what people have in their mind is that being an image bearer means being God's representative. You'll notice that what we call the creation mandate is in there in verse 28. And to be an image bearer of God means that we have a responsibility to be his representative here. And so one thing you could talk about in your group is you think about your future, your job, your family, all these things. Those things are not separate from being God's representative. Those things are the means through which you are God's representative. So it's not like I have my family and I'm going to do that, and then later I'll be God's representative. No, it's the way I live my life in these different arenas. I am God's representative in those places. So how can we fulfill that creation mandate of being his image bearers now? So everybody's gonna have a different major, maybe a different life plan. So hopefully that can spark some interesting conversation. So how can we fulfill the creation mandate with our lives is kind of the question there. And then finally, the last section is about the Sabbath, and I'll share a little bit more about this on the Thursday when I'm talking about it. But Sabbath, I think we often think is just like this time of sleep. God just sits back and is like, cool. Really, the language here in Genesis 2 is representative of these. This is too much to share maybe, but these ancient enthronement ceremonies. And so basically what's happening in Genesis 2 is that God is being enthroned in his creation. And so for us, what that means is that the Sabbath is a time to remember that God is king and we are not, that our lives do not determine whether the world goes round, that we are subjects of the king, not the king himself. And so I think, why does God end the week like this is a very interesting question. I think it's because it's kind of like the exclamation point. Like, you see all this stuff that's been made, and I'm the ruler of it all. Don't forget that. That should actually help us to rest a little bit in God. And for us, this means that we need to set aside time to acknowledge that, to put away our work and stop striving. and remember that God is the one who gives us everything, that everything comes from his hand. Um, and Jesus calls us to rest. Come to me, all who are weary, heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Um, and so, really, where I hope this kind of lands us is what parts of your life have gotten out of alignment with design. If Genesis 1 is all about design, I'm going to say something like God is not just a creator, he's a designer. He didn't just throw a bunch of stuff out and say, let's see what happens. No, he made things with a purpose. He made you with a purpose. And we can see how our lives have gotten out of line. And we see that by the stress and anxiety and the chaos that we exist in. And then the corollary to that question is, how is Jesus inviting you to return and to rest in him this semester? So please reach out. There's a lot of things I left unsaid here as far as maybe some of those looming questions over Genesis. But yeah, hopefully this gets you started and we'll go from there. I'm looking for the stop button. I feel so old. There it is. All right. Let me know if you have any questions. See you soon.